Morning to everyone joining in from India, Canada, and wherever else in the world they are joining us in these new normal times. We are here for the launch of Manpreet Singh's new book, her second book actually, or a third book. There have been two books that she has already written, and we are very happy to welcome you to this event. This event has been organized by the CoHaB Indian Diaspora Centre and the Indo-Canadian Studies Centre of the University of Mumbai. Just a few words about our centres before I introduce our chief guests. The Canadian Studies Centre, the Indo-Canadian Studies Centre, was launched at the University of Mumbai in 2011. And one of our guest speakers today, Dr. Satwinder Bains, was very much at the event and also very much at the conceptualization of the center itself. We have academic collaboration with the University of the Fraser Valley in British Columbia. And it is through them that we got the center from the British Columbia province. And we are very thankful to the UFV and SASI for helping us to come into existence. And of course, we have had a long connection with them. And in fact, if Satwinder was at the birth of our center, I was at the birth of her center, which has now metamorphosed into SASI in 2007, when I was there as a Shastri lectureship awardee. So it's wonderful to have these connections around the world. And I remember that this became a three-way connection afterwards, with the University of Munster joining in as well from Germany. And unfortunately, we do not have the professor from Munster with us today because it's the middle of the night for him. So, but he is there very much in spirit. So it was a three-way connection for a long time. The CoHaB IDC Center at the University of Mumbai is the second phase of the European Union sponsored, funded research program, which was part of the Marie Curie Initial Training Network at the European Union. And we were 6 partners at this partnership, this project. It was called the Constructions of Home and Belonging Project, an interdisciplinary project. There were sociologists and literature people, cinema people, and we had, apart from Germany, which was the flagship of the program, University of Munster with Professor Klaus Stierstoffer. We had 2 universities from Britain. We had 3 universities from Britain. We had SOAS, University of London. We had Northampton, and I think Janet Wilson from Northampton is also likely to join us today. And we had 2, and Oxford. We had the Migration Center at the Oxford University. In India, we were the only non-European university on board, the University of Mumbai, and we had the University of Stockholm in Sweden. And we produced 12 PhD students, and Satwinder, when she was chatting with us just now before we started the program, she remembered our students who have also visited her center. And I think Ruby, one of the students whom we trained, turned into a PhD, Dr. Ruby Rana, is with us this evening. And maybe Dr. Holly Morgan, I'm calling them doctors deliberately because they got their PhD degrees on this program. All right, so now CoHaB IDC is the second phase of this program. We are now a research center at the University of Mumbai. We still maintain our links with the University of Munster, and we carry on with lecture series, workshops, international conferences, seminars. We are also into publication. We have got a diaspora studies series, and we have published the first volume of that already, Going Beyond Borders. The second volume is in the press, well, in a manner of speaking. It's also turning into an e-book now. And that's the future of diaspora studies, going beyond the diaspora again, as we went beyond borders in the first one. I used to be the coordinator of the Indo-Canadian Studies Centre, as well as the director of the CoHaB Indian Diaspora Centre. But I've requested my colleague, Dr. Sachin Labde, who has taken over being the coordinator of the Indo-Canadian Studies Centre. And I hope that the UFV, SASI, and the Indo-Canadian Studies Centre at University of Mumbai will continue to collaborate as fruitfully as they had in all these years with Sachin as they have done with me. So that is there. And Manpreet and her book comes out of the Indo-Canadian Studies program, very much out of the Indo-Canadian Studies program at Mumbai University and at the UFV as well. Manpreet was our second, or rather our third senior fellow from the Diaspora Fund, which was set up at the Mumbai University jointly with the UFV. And I remember that we had Mr. Mike de Jong coming to our center. Satwinder was very much there. And as the health minister of BC in those days, he had very nicely put in a caveat about something to do with health as well into the program. So for our first senior fellowship, we had a doctor from Mumbai, Dr. Asrani, who went to the UFV, and he researched on geriatric problems, geriatric health in diaspora. And I remember that a lot of this work was done at the UFV in Abbotsford with the help of Satwinder and her team. The second senior fellow was Dr. Sridhar Rajeswaran, some of you know him, and he was here briefly at the beginning of this program. And he worked on Deepa Mehta's films, Deepa Mehta, the Indo-Canadian filmmaker. And we had a very fruitful time there. And it was at the time of the Komagata Maru's 100th anniversary of the Komagata Maru incident. And we remember being there. It was a privilege for us to have been there at the SFU's commemoration of that program. And we spent a lot of fruitful days learning about the Komagata Maru, attending conferences and events and museum visits, etc., under the guidance, shepherding of our friend, Dr. Satwinder. So that was a wonderful time that we had more recently at the Indo-Canadian Institute. Manpreet was very fortunate, I think, in having been able to research her Sikh identity project. It started out very small, but then grew in dimensions once she reached Abbotsford and actually saw the history and the heritage of the Sikhs in at least in Abbotsford and other parts of British Columbia. And then upon returning home, under the, I think, inspiration of her family and my prodding, she decided that she's going to turn it into a book and not just a report on her visit. Her report, incidentally, was also very extensive, but we insisted it should become a book, and so did her family. And so here it is, and we are very happy to welcome all of you to this book launch. We are very fortunate to have the Canadian contingent present as well. And we have been introduced to Dr. Kanwal Neel Singh by Satwinder. And so he's going to be launching our book. So let me first introduce, I'm sure that people from Canada know him, but we don't. And let me introduce you formally to Dr. Kanwal Singh. Dr. Kanwal Singh is a career educationist and has served as a teacher with the Richmond School District, and he's the Associate Director of Professional Programs in the Faculty of Education at the Simon Fraser University in Canada. He's currently the coordinator with the Simon Fraser University's Friends of Simon. And it's an outreach program where university students tutor and mentor immigrant and refugee children after school. Kanwal is an internationally acclaimed mathematician, and he speaks at many international conferences and hosts an award-winning television series, had hosted an award-winning television series, Math Shop, and is one of the authors of a wonderful book on mathematics. Dr. Kanwal is highly engaged in his community, and he has been a tireless volunteer for over 50 years in the South Asian community in Canada. He was coordinator of the 75th anniversary of the Komagata Maru incident, and during the centennial of the incident, he served as an advisor to the Komagata Maru incident website project with the SFU library. We must have seen the fruits of your coordination and the work you did with all the wonderful exhibitions at the SFU and at the actual event itself. So wonderful having you here, Dr. Kanwal, and we are very happy that you will be launching Manpreet's book. A brief word about Manpreet before I hand over to Kanwal. Manpreet has been our, as I said, she was our scholar, our senior fellow, but apart from that, I have known Manpreet for a very long time now as my PhD student, and she did excellent work on Shashi Deshpande, and the work on masculinities and femininities and Shashi Deshpande's work was also turned into a very well-received book, which is still of great help to scholars on Shashi Deshpande. Manpreet has researched this book not just in Canada at SASI with Dr. Satwinder and her team, and the field visits that she did there, but also after returning to India, she has increased the scope. She had increased the scope of her book, and the book has included questions of Sikh identity in diaspora in places other than Canada as well. She will be the best person to talk about this, and I am very happy that the book was taken up by Bloomsbury, India, and we have a representative from Bloomsbury, India, Mr. Chandrasekhar, who is also on this event this morning for us. And he will also be giving his response to Manpreet's book and their experience. I believe it's doing very well. They are very happy with it. So it's wonderful to have Mr. Chandrasekhar on board as well. So a big welcome to Dr. Kanwal, to Dr. Satwinder, who I'm not introducing now because my colleague, Dr. Sachin Labde, the current coordinator of the ICSC, will be doing so. But we shall start with the book launch itself, and I request Dr. Kanwal Neil to take over. Dr. Kanwal.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Dr. Bharucha. Good evening to those joining in Canada. Good morning to those participating in India, and good day to those joining from different parts of the world. A warm namaskar, sat sri akal, and Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. I also want to acknowledge the unceded Aboriginal territories of the Coast Salish people from where I'm speaking in British Columbia, Canada. Obviously, I will be speaking for a few minutes, and then we will be launching Dr. Manpreet J. Singh's book, The Sikh Next Door, An Identity in Transition, and our heartiest congratulations to her. Her book is a researched synthesis of how Sikh identities transition globally and locally. The identities are changing and transitioning historically, geographically, economically, culturally, religiously, socially, and intellectually. The book is an inclusive analysis, discarding old stereotypes and offering an impetus for a more nuanced understanding of the Sikh community. As an academic, Manpreet Singh has also deconstructed the community's stance of Sikh women in her book. by probing the community trajectories and placing their lived experiences within the context of a changing world. I'm going to share my screen, and I do have a PowerPoint that hopefully you can all follow through as we go along. So I'm hopeful everyone can see the screen. Am I right?
Not yet, sir.
Okay. Let's try again. I'm going to try share screen. Is that working now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's much better. Thank you. Okay, so as we celebrate the launch of this book, I want to take a few minutes to share some key ideas about the book. I will also share examples from the Canadian Sikh diaspora and personal experiences that reflect an identity in transition. So an identity in transition is something that we are working with. And one of the key ideas is that Sikhs have been in Canada or a people on the move. New influences have constantly molded them, since new facets need to be incorporated in the understanding of the community. Sikhs have been in Canada since 1897 or even earlier, according to some historical facts. And they have a glorious history in the shaping of Canada. Today, they participate fully in all aspects of Canadian life. However, many facts about them and their impact on Canadian society is still unknown. The pioneer Sikhs undertook many hardships. They faced discrimination and held low-paying jobs in railway, construction, lumber mills, forestry, mining, and fisheries. Now, the stories that you hear are probably from mainstream media, but it is researchers like Manpreet Singh who go behind the scenes and find out what some of the untold stories are also. Wherever the Sikhs would go, they would establish a Gurdwara. And these established Gurdwaras were not only a place of worship, but they were also a place where the community would gather. Khalsa Diwan Society Gurdwara in Abbotsford, and I know my colleague Satwinder Bains will talk more about that, was built in 1911 and was one of the first non-French or English sites designated as a Canadian National Heritage Site in 2002. And these are a couple of their plaques, and that is the actual Gurdwara, which still stands today. And the plaques are, of course, trilingual in English, French, and Punjabi. Now, the Sikhs have also been celebrating Vaisakhi since 1979, or we can call it Nagar Kirtan in Vancouver. And Surrey, British Columbia, hosts the largest Khalsa Day parade outside India. More recently, these parades or Nagar Kirtans have been taken in many cities across Canada. Actually, they also partake in many cities around the world, which is also the start of the new Sikh year in April. In terms of education, Khalsa School, a full-time independent school, was established in Vancouver in 1986, and there are other schools across Canada. And in September 1996, British Columbia schools started offering Punjabi language in its regular curriculum from grades 5 to 12 as a heritage language. Punjabi is the third most language spoken in British Columbia. Now, today, Sikhs have established in themselves in business, in transportation, forestry, farming, agriculture, construction, technology. They are basically professionals in a variety of fields across the country. In 2006, University of Fraser Valley opened the Center for Indo-Canadian Studies, which has recently been renamed as South Asian Studies. Another key idea in the book is we need to understand that despite their many internal diversities, a turban anywhere in the world gives them an entry into a brotherhood. And just to be clear, not all Sikhs wear turbans, and most women don't wear a turban either, but some of them would have some sort of a head covering. Sikhs have multiple identities. Though a turban is an entry into the brotherhood, but there are some identities which are mistaken identities. It is interesting how others may see you. And sometimes this changes. I'll give you a personal example. As an educator, I would have to go to different schools to supervise student teachers. In the 80s, racism was quite prevalent. I would walk into a high school and some students would start yelling Punjab, not knowing the meaning of the word even. In the 90s, I had hosted a television series, as Dr. Baruch had mentioned, and many students now would recognize me. So now I would walk into a school and the students would say, hey, there goes the math guy. Fast forward to the 2000s, and I walk into an elementary school in Surrey, and a young Sikh boy greets me with both hands folded, and in Punjabi, he says, Sat Sri Akal Babaji. So I guess times have changed, and now my age is also showing. Another key idea that is depicted in the book is we need to recognize a deep sense of community which permeates in the Sikh mind and extends beyond their religious identity. It is this which prompts them to be at the forefront to help others in times of need. I should also say that, like other communities, Sikhs have not been immune from social issues such as gang violence, domestic violence, drugs, discrimination, racism, and other social issues. The portrayal of Sikhs in the media is different. In the time gone by, the mainstream would usually portray the Sikhs in a negative tone, either as terrorists or someone who is unwanted. And then the ethnic media started to gain some sort of power in the whole system, and they would portray the Sikhs in the way it should be. And then the mainstream would pick up. Nowadays, the social media has had or is having a major impact on how Sikhs are viewed. With Facebook, WhatsApp, FaceTime, and the internet, you will see that the Sikhs, their stories are told in many, many different ways and in many different forms. For example, Ravi Singh and the work he does with Khalsa Aid in many war-torn places has now become knowledgeable, or is most people are being informed by that. Dr. Baruch also mentioned about the Komagata Maru incident. For us, the 1914 incident of the Komagata Maru is one of the most tragic and shameful events in Canadian history. It was an attempt to keep Canada an all-white nation. The government kept the passengers, British subjects, from landing. No single event in Canadian history better characterizes or symbolizes the experience of inclusion than this event. So let me talk about the legacy of the Komagata Maru. I'm going to use spoken word in the form of a poem. I'm going to talk about different issues that the Komagata Maru has left us with and its legacy continues with us. The Komagata Maru is a story truly Canadian. It is not a story of what happened in 1914. It is a story that is full of challenges and hopes. It is a story of a struggle to create a Canada that is an open society in which mutual respect and understanding are honored. Differences are respected and traditions are cherished. The legacy of the Komagata Maru continues. From exclusion to inclusion, from discrimination to determination, from tragedy to triumph, from rejection to acceptance, from inequality to equality. The legacy of the Komagata Maru continues. It is a story that is shared. Indigenous, Chinese, Japanese, and others have also faced discrimination. Acknowledgement, apology, and appeasement are steps in the right direction. But these are mere words if the actions are not authentic, accurate, and actual. The legacy of the Komagata Maru continues. Memorials, murals, and museums, along with plaques, proclamations, and pictures, are reminders of our past that should not be forgotten. Through discovery, dialogue, and diversity, we hope to inform, instruct, and inspire. The legacy of the Komagata Maru continues. It is a story of the integration of cultures, from hockey to kabaddi, from parades to nagar kirtans, from churches to gurdwaras, from square dancing to bhangra dancing, from bread and butter to dal and roti, from food banks to Guru Nanak's free kitchen. The legacy of the Komagata Maru continues. An identity in transition, viewed by others as Hindus, East Indians, Punjabi Canadians, Indo-Canadians, South Asians, people of color, hyphenated, heterogeneous, continuously evolving. The legacy of the Komagata Maru continues. Voting rights, human rights, civil rights, charter of rights is what we have gained. Let us be reflective of the past, responsible in the present, and reactive in the future. May we all live with Sat, Santok, Vicharo, truth, harmony, and wisdom. The legacy of the Komagata Maru continues. Lot has changed, but many things are still the same. So let me end by quoting in this time of the pandemic from Dr. Bonnie Henry in British Columbia: be calm, be kind, be safe, but every Sikh prayer ends with Nanak Naam Chardi Kala Tere Pane Sarbat Da Pala, which is asking the Almighty, may everyone live with hope and optimism, and may everyone prosper and be in peace, even though we are all facing very difficult times. So it is time for a celebration to look beyond stereotypes and understand the shifting identity of the Sikh Next Door. My heartiest congratulations to Manpreet J. Singh, and I would stop sharing my screen, if I can just do that. So it is time for us to, if you have a copy of the book, to hold it up and proudly congratulate Dr. Manpreet J. Singh on the launch of this wonderful book. Heartiest congratulations.
Congratulations, Manpreet. A big hand for Manpreet, if we can clap for Manpreet. Yes, Manpreet, would you care to respond to the launch today and let us have your views, please?
You are on mute, ma'am. Dr. Manpreet, you are on mute.
Yeah. So can you hear me now? Yeah. So thank you everyone for organizing this launch. It means a lot to me. Thank you, Dr. Kanwal Neil, for talking about the Canadian diaspora in light of what I have written in the book. You've got it spot on. So let me tell you about the making of the book. It all started with the ICSC fellowship, of course, and I went to Canada, to Abbotsford, and the initial project was on the Sikh diaspora in British Columbia. But when I came back, once I started the research, I just could not stop. Here was a chance to fill in so many gaps between what was being said about the Sikhs and the lived reality of the Sikhs. So this book is about contemporary urban Sikh identity and the transitions which have got it where it is today. Why did I wish to write about it? Sikhs have for long been constructed as a community of agriculturists and a martial people. And these are images which are very important to how the community has developed, because a huge part of the community have been landowners. And the martial tradition, of course, has continued since the times of the later gurus, through the evolution of the Khalsa identity, to the times of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, to the Sikh presence in the British Army, and the Sikh presence in the Indian Armed Forces. These images over time have become larger than life. And the problem with this is that there are two things. One, that the entire community does not fit into these images. And the second problem is that these images are static. They do not provide space for the transitions which the community has been experiencing for the last many decades. So I decided to write a book about a more comprehensive and a more contemporary Sikh identity. So I go beyond the Sikh in the Bhangra regalia, or the Sikh in the battlefield, or the Sikh as a landowner. And I talk instead of the Sikh in shirt and trousers. I mean, the identity might not be as colorful, but I think it is more identifiable. He's the man you would meet in everyday life and be a little confused about, because he doesn't gel with the images you glean from media and cinema and stuff like that. So it also introduces you to the social heterogeneity within a homogeneous religious identity. For example, it talks of the trader Sikh. Now, the trader Sikh is a traditionally city person. He's lived in urban areas all along. So the book traces his roots in West Punjab, and to a time where this group of the Sikhs was the custodian of the spiritual and the literary traditions of the community, because all the 10 gurus come from this group. And of their losses in partition, of their cultural and material losses, and their coming to North Indian cities in India, settling down, and how this history is reflected in their contemporary stances, right? This culture of aggregation, of constantly having to prove that they have arrived again, that they are no longer a refugee people, is reflected in who they are today. And I also talk about their discomfort within the images constructed around the community, the martial and the agricultural images, because they don't fit into those images. And as a result, their history and their profile is kind of nudged to the peripheries of the community identity narratives. Then the book also talks about the agriculturist Sikh who over time has moved to urban areas. Now, these are the people whose identity evolves out of their ethnic contexts and their land ownership. Now, how does this reflect when they become more and more entrenched into city culture, into education, into new economic opportunities? How does this reflect in their stances? And the fact that they had a privileged position in the rural hierarchies, and when they shift to the leveling demanded of city life, how does this play out? The book also talks of the Dalit Sikh identity. They move out of these hierarchies when they come to urban spaces, but this time it is to their advantage. They become economically, their profile improves. They are no longer under the shadows of the land-owning class. And many of them have gone abroad, and the money filters back into the families back home and gives them access to lifestyles which they could never dream of earlier. How does this play out into their current stances? For example, there is this sudden assertion of identity and a belligerence in their stance. They want to move out of the religious spaces and construct their own religious spaces. So these are the things that the book talks about. It also talks about how the old paradigms have followed them to the urban spaces in certain areas. For example, the Dalit Sikh community in Assam. Nobody has known about them for long, but they've been there for nearly 100 years. And today they are being othered by the local population. And once again, they need the help of the so-called upper caste who followed them to Assam. And once again, the old cycle is back in place. Then there is the diaspora. As Dr. Kanwal Neel has right now told about the trajectory in Canada, Sikhs are there all over the globe, many of them now 4th and 5th generation people. They went to Africa as railroad workers. This all started in the colonial times. Then they went as paramilitary forces to places like Singapore, Hong Kong, China, and of course, they went to UK and Canada, as Dr. Singh, Dr. Kamal Neel has already elaborated, as lumber mill workers, as farm hands. More recently, there are people working in farms in Italy and fruit orchards in other European countries. Now, over decades and over generations, there was bound to be a change in the attitudes. I mean, as they have improved in prosperity, they've gone in for education, moved to more mainstream urban lives. And there is a difference in the sense because local systems of education, peer pressure, stakes in the financial and political, of the place where they live, these become important to them. And therefore, their attitudes are bound to change as well. And in fact, when I went to Canada, I talked to so many people thanks to the help I got from the Indo-Canadian Studies Centre there. I interacted with a lot of people. And I felt that, though they try to maintain their connections to culture, they seem to be more comfortable with other Sikh diaspora identities in transnational spaces than to the ones back home. So there is a shift in their worldviews and how they are. The book talks about all these as well. And an important aspect of the book, I think, is like when I was talking of these identities, I thought it is also very important to contextualize them within the social spaces that they are living in, because our social identity is not just what we are, it is how it plays out within the people we are living amongst. How is that playing out? For example, like there are many aspects discussed in the book, but I will discuss one or two here for lack of time. For example, within India, the social and cultural similarities between the Sikhs, especially those from West Punjab, and the majority community are a given. There is so much common among them. However, along the time, there was a rigidification of identities, and the Sikhs decided that they were a different people. They were emphasizing on that distinction from the majority. So how does this play out? One important aspect that reflects it is the way Sikhs are represented in mainstream media or in humor, the jokes around Sikhs. And so I thought I would explore that, because that is an aspect rarely explored. And as you go deeper and you study the representations, you realize that most of them are constructed around this difference, an attempt to trivialize that difference perhaps. For example, if you see representations in cinema, the Sikh, this half comic, half Superman, the character that is composed is a, it's that difference converted into a spectacle. And similarly, there are jokes constructed around the work ethics of the Sikh community. I mean, their enterprise is constructed as laughable because it is like your way of doing things against mine. And, because it breaches the established protocols, it becomes laughable. So there is this, lovable Sikh character, but who will always speak with this, silly accent. And so what is happening here is that there is this subtle othering mixed with enough goodwill to prevent a reaction, but enough caricaturing to cause discomfiture. And then the emphasis that the Sikhs need to participate in the jokes is, I think, a form of social policing. Why? Because, humor is something which brings people together, but it also shuts them out. And as a minority in urban spaces, it is not possible for them to be shut out of social and professional groups. And so they give into it, but it does causes an underlying discomfiture. So similarly, when we talk of the diaspora, the turban, of course, of late has been being associated with hate crimes. Though what I think is that it has less to do with the Sikh religious identity than the turban being identified as a symbol of immigrant identity, and also the threat of economic and social incursions that it involves, and the real threats which have happened in the past because of immigrants, which includes some associated with the Sikhs, like the bombing of the Air India flight in Canada. But we also have to remember that these are images coming out of a past. The profile is shifting, the times are shifting. And if we keep on giving in to these images, we also give in to the narratives constructed around them. So it is very important to analyze these images and to talk about them and to kind of try to move out of them, because the profile is changing, the community profile is changing, and we need to bring that social profile, the new social profile, into the social cognition. The book also talks about women, because as an agricultural community and as a martial community, it was easy to have the women on the sidelines. But now when we talk of the urban Sikh identity, I think they need to be brought back into the frame rather firmly. And so when we talk of the Sikh woman, the community narratives tend to lapse into the reformist intent of the Sikh religion. And there is no doubt that the intellectual tradition handed down by the gurus is radical in intent and the kind of place they wanted to give women in society. The question is, how far has that intellectual tradition seeped into the lives of the ordinary Sikh woman? And therefore, when I talk of the Sikh woman, I talk of it in context of this tug of war between the intellectual tradition and a very conservative and patriarchal society within which it was to infiltrate, and how much of it has happened. And the duality is, clear in many of the things. For example, if we talk of India, the percentage of educated women from minorities, the percentage is highest among the Sikh community. And so is the percentage of female feticide within the Sikh community. So these are dualities which, we need to address them. I mean, we cannot keep on brushing them under the carpet. The book ends with, I try to explore the possible directions which the community will take in the times to come as they venture out into urban spaces, into other cultural settings across the world. So will the Sikhs be able to maintain the cohesiveness, which is a mark of their, identity, despite all the internal differences? I think they will be, because we have a very strongly entrenched, institutionalized structure to the religion. And wherever in the world the Sikhs are, they will tend to get together because their social lives and their religious lives are so intricately mixed with each other. How will the intercommunity differences play out, as more and more people come into urban spheres? I think urban living is going to bridge some of these gaps, because as education, common professional backgrounds, social stature become more important. I think the differences between whether someone is a Jat or a Khatri or an Arora, I mean, the Sikhs here will understand what I'm talking about. These will perhaps decrease. Already since I was a young girl and to now, I've already seen a huge change. There are marriages taking place within these groups which were not there earlier, and so on and so forth. And how will the Sikhs be able to maintain their core value system as they spread out into urban areas, among multicultural people, among different kinds of societies? Very much so, because the core values of Sikhism are derived from humanitarianism. So I think as the canvas becomes bigger, the strokes are going to get bolder. In fact, throughout the pandemic, we have seen the Sikh concept of seva in play across the world. And I think that is one of the major things by which the Sikhs are going to be identified in the coming times. So these were some of the things from the book. There is a lot more, and I wish all of you do read the book and take a more nuanced understanding of the community from it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Manpreet, for a wonderful exposition, and we hope that you will continue with this research in times to come and take it forward. I now invite the Bloomsbury India, Mr. Chandrasekhar, to give his response. Mr. Chandrasekhar.
Thank you so much. Good morning and a warm greeting to all the delegates, dignitaries in India and Canada. I thank you all for joining in the virtual book launch of an important book that I believe will leave a lasting impression. I'd like to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about Bloomsbury and about the book that we published. Bloomsbury Publishing is an award-winning, innovative and global independent publisher of fiction, non-fiction, children's education, specialist trade and academic publishing with offices in London, Oxford, New York, Sydney, and New Delhi. Bloomsbury Academic serves communities of students, scholars, educators, and libraries with specialist content, subject expertise, educational materials, digital library resources, and open access services. Our prestigious imprints include Arden Shakespeare, Methuen Drama, T&T Clark Biblical Studies and Theology. Quick note about Bloomsbury India. We were set up at about 8 years ago to nurture scholarship from India and South Asia. Bloomsbury Academic India was set up about 2 years ago, and we have been able to work with leading scholars and thinkers from India and have published valuable content for scholars and libraries to better understand the region in these times of post-truth. As we grapple with the pandemic, questions about race and ethnicity rage across the globe. In these times, this book is is an important and a welcome addition as stereotyping of communities and people continues. The author, Dr. Manpreet Singh, mentions her motivation in attempting to write this book. She's, of course, mentioned about the images and the stereotyping of those images. She says that she's attempting to push aside these images and to make way for more relevant ones. And she explained in her brief note that she just shared previous to me. And she says that the book focuses on real life people to see how they have evolved through the complex shifts of time. And she says she's making an attempt to broaden the frame of reference to create a more comprehensive community profile. And she's also looking at contextualizing them in these broader social milieus. And uh, uh, she also says that in tracing these evolutions through old and new contexts, the book establishes the centrality of these identities to the understanding of Sikh community as it exists today. And in conclusion, she's of course mentioned that how the seva concept of seva, which is so much ingrained in the Sikh community, how that would see through. And she explains that that as the community diversifies into new profiles, they thus remains, she says, a connecting link holding it together. And that, I understand, is the seva which she mentioned. It says that it not only prevents it from falling apart, but also provides it with means to forge new cohesions. An understanding of Sikhs must therefore derive from within the confluence of this core identity and many others, which make them the people they are. It also lies in recognizing that they profess their faith and follow the values endorsed by it in dealing with a complex social world through a multiplicity which moves beyond a singular identity. So we definitely, I mean, it was such a pleasure working with Dr. Manpreet Singh while we discussed the book with her and how the manuscript came about, and finally a wonderful cover that was created. So we really congratulate her, and we hope and we wish and hope that this book does well, and a lot of people get to read, and they understand the community better. So that's all I have to say. Thank you so much for the time that you have given me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chandrasekhar. And I now invite Sachin Labde to introduce Dr. Satvinder Bains so that she can speak to us as well. Sachin. Sachin?
Yes. Uh, Thank you, Professor Barucha. It just it is absolute pleasure to introduce someone who has been at the inscription of Indo-Canadian Studies Centre at the University of Mumbai. So I take this pleasure to introduce Dr. Satvinder Bains. Uh, Dr. Satvinder Bains is the director of South Asian Studies Institute at the University of Fraser Valley and an associate professor in social cultural media studies, College of Arts. Satvinder's critical analysis of India's multilingual policy and planning has fueled her interest to study the impact of language, culture, and identity on South Asian Canadian migration, settlement, and integration. Her research includes and intersects cross cultural education with a focus on anti racist curriculum implementation, race, racism, and ethnicity, identity politics, Sikh feminist ideology, migration, and the South Asian Canadian diaspora and Punjabi Canadian cultural historiography. I'm very happy to share with you that Satvinder has very good presentation by Kamal. Satvinder has extensive years of professional experience in community development and has worked extensively with organizations in the area of cross-cultural mental health, immigrant women, youth and families, and board development, diversity. I mean, and the list goes on and on. So there's a lot of contribution that Dr. Satvinder Bains has made to the academia and to the community. She continues to serve on numerous committees and organizations locally, nationally, and internationally. So with these words, I would like to welcome Dr. Satinder Bains and request her to share her remarks. Dr. Satinder Bains.
Thank you, Sachin. When I sent my bio, I didn't mean for you to read it out, but thank you for that. So I also want to start by acknowledging that I'm living and working on the unceded territory of the Stolo people, the people of the river, and my own position as a settler on this land, and recognizing and reconciling myself to the truth of that, and working towards a recognition and understanding of my own culpability. Thank you, Nilofer, for arranging this India-Canada launch. I welcome my Canadian friends and Indian friends who have joined us both in the morning and the evening together to hear Manpreet's launch and her book. I thank you all for coming together today. It's an honor to be Manpreet at the beginning and at the end of your journey for this book. Probably not the end, but the launch of the book. It's my honor that I'm here with you today. So thank you, Nilofer, for arranging all this. I truly appreciate that. This long-term relationship with the University of Mumbai has produced many beautiful fruits, and this is one of them. So Manpreet, thank you for including us in your acknowledgements, and we're very proud that this book has come out. The idea of the big word that you used in the book about transition is really resonates. I think the name of the book resonates with society generally, but of course with the Sikh community and in this century and the past century. So I think you have brought us to a really good juncture in terms of understanding our past so we can reflect on our future and perhaps project forward. I think it gives us that jumping ground for us to see where are we going. So I was struck by the book in terms of bringing us to a certain contemporary moment. And maybe the next book for you, Manpreet, is to project us into the future to say, you know, where do we go with this transition and where are we going and where might we end up? So I think it has really real resonance for us. This comparative analysis that you've given us between Jats and Khatris has also really filled a gap, as you mentioned. Many gaps that you saw that made you write all those chapters. So I think those are really good scholarship for us to further in our own understanding of between caste and class within Sikhs. And even the idea of urban Sikhs and representation and diaspora and women, I think this is very important work for us to analyze. So I thank you for contributing that scholarship to our learning. As you know, the largest diaspora Sikhs in one of the largest groups is in Canada. And, you know, as Kanwal has mentioned, whether this book, moving away from India, whether we're in Delhi or Dublin, I think the stories, that the record that you've created would resonate with us, whoever reads this book. So again, thank you for that. Reimagining our images is really important, as you mentioned. The early 1900 Sikhs that came to BC really had to reimagine their identity. They came from a place of privilege and ended up in Canada where racism was rampant, and you know they were at the bottom of the heap in a moment. So this idea of Sikhs coming from privilege, coming from landowning classes was really put to the test. And fortunately for us, as Kanwal has attested to it, that the resilience within the community brought them out of it, and you know they continued in their quest for upward mobility, as you've written in, so eloquently in the book. But facing discrimination, facing the racist slurs that they faced, really I think must have been a difficult moment to reconcile around being at the, as Sikhs, women, men with turbans, mostly men at the time, who considered the turban kind of like a crown, you know, the Taj for them, to find that the turban had this connotation of, as you said, the immigrant experience, but even worse than that, something of, you know, lower class and lower citizenship in Canada. So the turban itself has gone through a transition in terms of an understanding of where people who wore it and then removed it, shaved their hair, removed their hair, then put it back on. And as Kanwal has attested, the idea of the RCMP and others who have, the turban is a political act, both in India and in Canada, but definitely in Canada, it is a political act for us. And you've brought that forward in the book to say that how that resonates both for women and for men, that the star for both for women and men. So again, you know, this land owning class that moved first to British Columbia faced a lot of challenges in the colony. They had come, as you suggested, from colony to colony, had already moved out of India, but coming to Canada was a real test to their courage. And so this idea of, you know, longing for home, wanting to return, as you have mentioned in the book, and that got lessened over time, but this idea of belonging, where do we belong? And the idea of home, where is home? You know, do we still, I at least keep saying home to both places. So transitioning from one home to another home and still maintaining that identity. There is, you know, four cohorts of South Asian Sikhs who live in BC, who live in Canada, and each one has their own identity and their own ideas of identity, and each one has transitioned in their identity making. And I want to say that the fourth group, the ones who are still continuing to immigrate to Canada from India, bring with them this idea of challenging the status quo when they get here. So the more, you know, fourth and fifth generation Sikhs who live in Canada are constantly being thinking about whether they giving up their Sikh identity was something that was willingly done, or was that something they can go back to? I know music and public culture has really informed the Sikh community, sometimes more than religion. And so clothing, for example, from the early years to now has really shifted. And you see that in India as well. You've talked about the you know, jean wearing girl with the kurta on. You see that here as well. So the transnational movements of people from the early years to now the time has shrunk and geographies have shrunk. And what we're seeing in India today, because of the age of information, you're seeing in Canada the next day. So identity making, while being diffused in the urban center in India, is actually frozen in Canadian society at some level. People have stayed in their kind of 40s and 50s milieu, and that identity has been really been under this microscope to understand whether it needs more transitioning. So, you know, one of the challenges we talk about in your book, you talk about is the idea of social taboos and culture that we bring with us. And again, I think in Canada, we're not immune from those cultural taboos that continue to plague us in India. And female feticide happens here. Caste and class is relevant here still, especially at times of marriage. And I think there are stresses that we need to write about and speak about and talk about in the public discourse, because these are things we're not willing to really air in the public. But I think the more, there are scholars in the midst who are with us today who are constantly you know, writing about our social taboos that inhibit our identity making and inhibit us moving forward. So while you speak so eloquently about this huge transition from the rural to the urban and transnational movements, we're still quagmired in some of our taboo systems that hold us back from really exploring our full identity. And those taboos, you know, will over time, hopefully as a generationally, you know, the land that students, I'll give you an example. In my class, I have students who have never been to India. It's just in their imagination or in their home or in their language or in the religion that they're exposed to, but continue to feel that it is a place they have some identity with. You know, a number of them, their parents own land in India, and I asked how many of you would sell that land if your parents passed away, and 50% or more than 50%, just as a poll, said we wouldn't sell it. I said, have you seen it? No. Do you know where it is? No, but we wouldn't sell it. So those ideas still resonate around home and land and ownership, and so I think your book brings that out beautifully in terms of where we are today, and I keep bringing us back to contemporizing our identity to where we are today, and then where are we going? What's the future? So I'll close by saying, you know, you've created a really meaningful dialogue and discourse for us to continue this into the next generation. And I hope that these transitions that we're in today will allow us a full acceptance of our identity in terms of how we define ourselves. I know in the diaspora, we are also defined by the other, and that is our challenge, to constantly be this dance between the other and ourselves, and finding that grounding that allows us to be who we are is a challenge in the diaspora. And I think you say it's a challenge in urban centers as well. So I want to really bring us to the idea of moving forward from your book. I hope that Nilofer, there could be another conversation past today that would allow us to maybe have Manpreet talk about where she thinks the book will end up in 20 years and where she thinks this will take us. So I'm really beholden to you for bringing us to this point, Manpreet. And I think it's a very readable book. As you say in the beginning, you've tried to make it not so academic in the sense that it should be something we all want to read. I shared it with my family and I said, you all have to read these chapters, you have to get into this book. So I do thank you for bringing this scholarship to us. It has resonance for scholars in South Asian studies, in Sikh studies, in Punjab studies, in urban studies, diaspora studies. I think it has real relevance to us. So thank you, Bloomsbury, for publishing it. And thank you for your hard work in writing it. It's 4 or 5 years of your labor. And I do thank you for not just writing about the diaspora, but making it a broader book to encompass all the other communities that you brought into the book. So it's a great pleasure for me to be here today. And I hope this is the beginning of a longer journey with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Satvinder. Thank you very much. And we do hope to have you and Manpreet and other scholars from Canada on our digital platforms. It's so much easier now to have you on these platforms and having you fly over from Canada at great expense and time and effort. And the CoHaB Indian Diaspora Centre is already doing several programs online, and we'll be having, and it's all centered on the diaspora. So we would like to invite people from your center and from other places, including Dr. Kanwal Singh, to speak on our platform. And we usually have these programs in the afternoon because we have participants from Australia and New Zealand on those platforms as well. But if we have speakers from Canada, we could always do it at this time in the morning, Indian time morning, so that we could have a meaningful interaction with our Canadian friends as well. We look forward to that. And may I now invite Sachin to say a few words?
Thank you, Dr. Barucha. Okay, so first of all, a hearty congratulations to Dr. Manpreet Singh for giving us this wonderful book. I'm all ears and I'm all eyes actually want to read and reread this book and come up with my appreciation for the book. I'm very happy that Professor Barucha, who has been the mind behind this event, kick-started the event with brief genesis and history of Indo-Canadian Studies Centre, as well as the CoHaB Indian Diaspora Centre at the University of Mumbai. And it is a proud moment for the Indo-Canadian Studies Centre to be part of Dr. Manpreet Singh's book launch, which has been one of the fruitful outcomes of the joint efforts of Indo-Canadian Studies Centre and CICS University of Fraser Valley, British Columbia, Canada, through the South Asia Diaspora Fund Senior Research Fellowship. So it is absolute pleasure, to be part of this. I am very happy, that we had Dr. Kanwal, who is a career educator and coordinator with SFU's Friends of Simon, who contributed through his in-depth analysis and insightful observations about the book. As he pointed out, the book is an in-depth analysis of the changing image and identity of Sikh community which is a necessary step in the light of dominant discourse of stereotypical image. Dr. Kanwal's appreciation for the book highlighted the strength of the book in, I must say that, in bringing out the untold stories of Sikh community and their contribution in the national development. So the key ideas that he highlighted, and I think it's very important to note that, how we need to understand the multiplicity of identities. Dr. Kanwal's review of the book through his personal experiences suggests that the book's groundedness in the reality is significant. Portrayal of Sikhs in the mainstream ethnic and social media, as Dr. Kanwal commented, is something that has been addressed in the book. Dr. Kanwal's brief but very insightful commentary on Komagata Maru certainly requires a special mention. It also suggests that a lot may be explored academically to bring out the various dimensions of the discourse on Komagata Maru. Dr. Kanwal's appeal to celebrate the launch of the book that gives us an opportunity to look beyond stereotypes and understanding the shifting identity of Sikh community was met with a round of applause. I'm very happy that in responding to Dr. Kanwal's remarks, the author of this seminal work, Dr. Manpreet Singh, spoke candidly about what intrigued or triggered her interest or motivated her to write this book. Now we understand from her remark where the vibrant plurality of the nominally singular idea of the community, comes from. Inclusivity, if I may say, is that one word that could sum up the range of Sikh community that the book covers, be it agrarian, martial, business, Dalit women, or diaspora dimensions to the identity. We are all so sure that the book will find a wide range of readers as it gives voice to the aspirations and concerns of regional, national, and international Sikh citizens. At the same, I must mention that the book will be a means of educating the othering majority that needs to move beyond the jocular stereotyping of the community. Dr. Manpreet Singh, thank you very much for giving us this book, and hearty congratulations to you again. I would just quickly sum up by adding something more, that it was an absolute honor and pleasure to have Dr. Satwinder Bains as the special guest. Dr. Bains' remarks, not only as someone who has with lived experiences, but as a seasoned academician and expert, would unravel the significance of Dr. Manpreet Singh's book and its significance. So thank you, Dr. Bains, for bringing out this part of the book to our attention, which writer has candidly worked on despite socio-cultural taboos attached to it. I must thank Dr. Bains for suggesting directions in which we can continue this dialogue. The Indo-Canadian Studies Centre, always in association with the CoHaB IDC at the University of Mumbai, will be more than happy to collaborate and continue this dialogue. So thank you very much, Dr. Bharucha, once again, for allowing me to share my views and be part of this event. Over to you, Dr. Bharucha.
Thank you, Sachin. And we now have a question and answer session. And there are several questions already in the chat box. But before we start, I would like to say that Sachin, Dr. Labde, is also looking after the Shastri Canadian Centre at the University of Mumbai. And we hope that with the help of Sachin's Indo-Canadian Centre, the Shastri Canadian Centre, and the CoHaB IDC, we'll be able to do more collaborative programs with the UFV and with Dr. Kanwal Neil in future. So if there are any ideas forthcoming from Satwinder or Sachin or Dr. Neil, we'll be happy to take them on board and have international interdisciplinary webinars anytime. Kirti is there to help us with the logistics. So let us do that, okay? We have got several questions and remarks in the chat box. And if Manpreet can unmute herself, I
Yes.
think most of them would be addressed to Manpreet. There are, of course, congratulations to Manpreet from Amrita Talwar, from Ruby Rana, who's looking forward to doing more work, to hearing more. And with Ruby now in the Canadian government immigration department, we hope that she will be roped in as well by Sachin and Satwinder and Manpreet for help on future events and things. Peter Geller is congratulating Manpreet again and for involving colleagues and friends in India and Canada. We couldn't have done this without the Canadian colleagues, so it was absolutely essential that you are a part of this program. The book is a result of the collaboration, and the book launch had to be collaborative too. There's Nicola saying hello and congratulations. And Satwinder is saying lovely things about us as well, which she normally does. Now, if we can have some real questions, people. Some real questions, issues. I can see Michael Hawley, who was busy taking notes, etc. Would you like to say something? Would somebody else like to say something?
I think a question for Manpreet would be, well, what's next, Manpreet?
Yeah, there's a question from Satwinder. What's next, Manpreet? Right, what's next? Any plans while Michael thinks of something to ask her or say to her?
Well, I've been toying with the idea of writing a work of fiction based on my research that has gone into this book. And also, some of the excerpts from the book regarding the stereotyping was shared on social media by my daughter. The kind of response that I saw there makes me feel that perhaps we need to do a full-length work on that as well. So these are the two things which I have in mind currently.
Right, I remember that when Manpreet was preparing her proposal for the project for her fellowship, she had actually focused on the social media and on this whole idea of the caricature of the Sikh identity in jokes, on social media, and that then she had moved into into wider areas. So I think this is a good idea if you are able to do
And
something.
there's another thing that very close to my heart because I come from a background of literature. So I want to, I'm looking forward to some kind of collaboration to collate works of literature which reflect Sikh identity and which is very different from the kind of caricaturing you see in cinema and humor, etc. So that would be a great idea. In fact, I've already worked on two of the books. So let's see if that goes somewhere.
And there is a question from Harneet Kaur, who's saying, how would you explore the intersection of caste and gender in urban Sikh milieus?
Okay, that is my daughter, and I knew she would put me into a tight spot. So, caste and gender, yes, caste and gender have impacted each other, whether in the past or in the present. In the past, of course, caste, the higher caste, so-called higher caste Sikhs, have, as in other cultures, laid more restrictions on their women. In the agricultural class, which are also considered to be among the most powerful classes within Sikhism, the women have had more liberty in the sense that, among the common people, they were part of the working force as well. But then because it has been a very, very patriarchal setup, so there have been constraints on women, which I think are, things are improving now in urban spaces. And in fact, what I see is that among Sikh girls, the younger generation, there is a very conscious determination to hold their own. In spite of the restrictions, in spite of the expectation that they will go by the earlier paradigms, I see that there is a definite shift. The fact that there has been so much emphasis on education within the community, and educating the girl child has been equally emphasized upon. And although, Sikh women were not really allowed to use that education as a means to economic independence always, because there was this great emphasis on home being the first priority. But I think that there is now this whole generation of women in urban spaces who have had this education, but not had the opportunity to make it, to become financially independent through it, are very determined to see their daughters do it. So, the greatest emphasis on the girls within Sikh families getting education and becoming financially independent is from the generation of women who were educated, but not into the workforce. So in that sense, the urban spaces making a difference. Also that women who are educated are now articulating, they are the tellers of their stories. So instead of a narrative constructed by the community, there is the the true story coming through the voices of the women in the community.
Right. I would like to add here, Harneet, that intersectional research is the buzzword today, not just in diaspora studies, but it starts with gender studies itself. And in the context of India and the third world, caste becomes a very important factor. So you cannot talk in isolation about diasporics without bringing in caste, religion, without bringing in race, without bringing in gender. And there are a lot of studies available, and one of our dear colleagues from the CoHaB group, Avtar Bra, is the kind of very important scholars working in the area of intersectional studies. There is Karchik Tolayan, etc. And we can bring them in if we are doing a kind of a webinar, a collaborative webinar with UFV and with the Shastri Institute, bring them in to speak about these issues. Hector is saying, Hector D'Souza is incidentally our dear, not just our dear travel agent, but a very faithful follower of our webinars and seminars, always there. And he has lived for a long time in Canada. So he is a return diasporic who has de-diasporized himself many years before the act became more popular. And Hector is saying, do you feel Canada is an easier country to integrate in, considering its liberal ideology and acceptance of different nationalities? Maybe this is something for maybe Satwinder or Kanwal also to come in, if they would like to unmute themselves. Or with Manpreet is going to start it off, and then Satwinder and Kanwal can come in.
So Canada is, kind of extension to Punjab. Moving to Canada is there on everybody's mind within Punjab. But, I also had this feeling that Canadian society is a kind of an ideal society where these differences are not very prominent. But over time, and in my connection to UFV and to Dr. Satwinder Ben's and to Sharon Sandra's work, I feel that the situation is not really all that ideal. The undercurrents exist there as well. So Punjabis go to Canada for the economic opportunities, primarily. And I think it is for Dr. Satwinder Benz to elaborate on that.
Satwinder, would you like to say something?
I don't think there's an ideal place for any cultural communities when they shift with in such great numbers from the east to the west or south and north, wherever. I think there are challenges, but I would say that the great number of Punjabis Sikhs that live in BC is a kind of buffer. It's kind of a security net that buffers us a little bit from the racial discrimination that's out there, especially now when the numbers are greater. There are people coming from India, getting off a plane, going to an Indian household, working in an Indian business, going to an Indian store, going to, you know, they've kind of insulated themselves a little bit from the vagrancies of living in Canadian society. But I think as you venture out, as you adapt and integrate and, you know, incorporate Canadian values and opinions, I think it is a country that has its double-edged sword where it provides you with that opportunity, but at the same time limits you a little bit with what you can do with it. So I don't want to at any way, you know, put down Canada, because we have some amazing people here who have done some amazing work, which they may not have been able to do in another country. So I would say it's a bit of a double-edged sword that we're always balancing on. Michael, maybe, and Kanwal can say more, but I think that it is a complicated dance.
I think that the idea of a double-edged sword is an appropriate metaphor for talking about the Sikh issues in Canada. Yeah, the multiculturalism too is a double-edged sword, and it can play both ways. It's as inclusive as it can be exclusive. So yeah, it's one of those things that get negotiated in very different ways, and Sikhs in Canada very often find themselves caught between multiculturalism and what they might think of being their own Sikh identity, because those things don't necessarily fit. And I'll just give you one example that happened in my class actually today. We were talking about the idea of miri piri, this non-separation of religion and the temporal. And I had a student saying, Canada doesn't accept that. In Canada, there's a separation between church and state. So how do I, as a Sikh, fit into that multicultural context? So that's sort of, you know, riding on the coattails of some of the stuff that Dr. Baines said, but yeah, it's problematic, and it puts Sikhs in a difficult position, and it cuts both ways.
And Michael, you had a question. Maybe you could ask that as well.
Oh, yeah, I was just wondering that you use, first of all, thank you very much for publishing the book, and thank you very much for writing it. It's a pleasure to meet you. You use that idea of transition as sort of a framing device for the book. And I think that's a very useful tool for looking at sort of the changes that have taken place over time. But I'm also wondering how much of your book is really also a work in trying to decolonize knowledge about Sikhs, about representations of Sikhs, misunderstandings about Sikhs. Because so many of these, you talked about the stereotypes, how many of these stereotypes or caricatures were actually developed quite intentionally, particularly in Canada, as part of the colonial project. And I'm just wondering how much of your work do you see as kind of trying to undo that, to decolonize?
There are parts of it which I would, put under this heading of decolonizing. For example, the differentiation between the different groups within the community. For example, the agricultural class and the trading class. It is a colonial legacy. The divisions that have cropped up between these two identities is definitely a colonial legacy, because the agricultural class was more important for the British in terms of the revenue it generated and the people it gave for the British Army. And they constructed the rest of the community as different from the agricultural community. And these divisions and these stereotypes, which were established during the colonial period, have persisted, over time. So yes, it is in that respect about decolonizing the parts of the identity, but a lot of it is also about moving on in a more globalized world, a world which has new economic opportunities, a world which opens so many new professions and fields for you. So it goes either way. It is about that in certain respects and about other things otherwise.
Any
Can
more? Sorry.
Interject for a second.
Was that Kanwal?
Yes, it is.
Yes, yes, because there's a question after you, so we'll
Sure.
listen to what Kanwal has to say.
I think the question about is it easier in Canada? Well, we haven't had it easy. Not till 1947, we weren't even allowed to vote. We weren't even allowed to enter and stay here in Canada. And Sachin, Dr. Lamade, you talked about the Komagata Maru. They were sent back to India. Fast forward, 2016, Harjit Singh Sajjan becomes the Minister of Defense in Canada. Who would have imagined that 102 years later, the same irony of removing us, and now we have a Sikh who is the Minister of Defense. So one of the things that has happened in Canada is that the Sikhs have also been very political. And they have had that way of finding that ways to be part of the Canadian society. And we in British Columbia are right now in the midst of an election. There's an election happening this coming Saturday, and there was a debate. And one of the interesting questions in the debate that was asked to all three leaders of the three parties is, what do you have to say about the white privilege you have? Who could have imagined asking those questions in Canada? And the moderator was of Indian descent. So how things have changed in the last little while is very interesting. But if we look south of the border in the United States, that is our fear, that things can change overnight. We just do not know. So I think, as Michael and Satvinder pointed out, it's a double-edged sword, and we have to be cautious. We have to be observant all the time. And when the time comes for us to speak, we have to hold our head high and speak rather than just get locked up and not speak about it. And I think that is part of the Sikh milieu, is when Guru Gobind Singh Ji said that you have to be able to, speak up when there is tyranny and injustice, and that's what the Sikhs have done here. Thank you.
Thank you, Kanwal, for this contribution. I agree with you. I think it's very, very important to speak up. We have a question from Parminder Rana, Dr. Ruby Rana's dad, for those of us who know him. And he had become a kind of an honorary member of our CoHaB group while Ruby was doing her research with us at Mumbai. So many of us from Mumbai University know him very well. And he has a question for Manpreet. Is there any way to ensure that the evolving identity of Sikhs in the Western world can be kept insulated and unique rather than merging into the Western identity?
See, I don't think insulation is a good idea in any case, because nothing can be static. Things move on, they mutate. So you cannot think of keeping the Sikh community absolutely away from the mainstream. They have to be. They're living there. They are parts of the social and political structures of that country. How can you keep them insulated? The thing is that, yes, a greater understanding of their culture, of their background, of their religion will perhaps create a willing desire to, keep connected to their identity in terms of their culture and the religion. So I don't think insulation is the correct way to go about it. The correct way is to educate them more in a more rational manner, away from these caste and group politics, which has been a big part of how the elders in the community have introduced the youngsters to the religion and the community. So I think you will have to do away with it. You will have to talk in terms of Sikh religion being a humanitarian religion, of a religion which can very much be in place within the multicultural societies that they're living in. That is the way to go about it.
I think Mr. Rana's question also concerns the eternal tussle anywhere in the world with the first generation diasporics and the second and third generation diasporics who experience language loss, culture loss, all kinds of losses are experienced, and the efforts, the sometimes desperate efforts of the first generation to keep the second and third generations rooted in the old culture. So this is a tussle which goes on anywhere with diasporics, not just Sikh diasporics, but diasporics from different regions and religions and cultures and races as well. And I think there's a question which relates to this from Sambaji Sirsat. Sambaji, incidentally, was our project associate for the Indo-Canadian Centre and the CoHaB Centre when this research by Dr. Ruby Rana, etc., were going on. And he has an interesting question, Manpreet. He's saying, are there any, which is related to what we were talking about, are there any cultural clashes between first, second generation diaspora based on traditional religious values and modern values, like shown in the movie Ocean of Pearls? Thanks to Ruby, we saw all these films.
That is bound to happen, I think. And it is like Dr. Satvinder Benz and Dr. Amal Neil, who would be able to tell you so much more about it. Those clashes are bound to happen in, also in the social and cultural realms, along with the religious. Once you are letting your children out into, a multicultural society, and they are being influenced by the local systems of learning, they are under peer pressure, and they want to kind of, blend in better into the society that they want, that they are going to be living in. So obviously, what you're telling them at home is going to come into clash with what they're hearing from the outside. And I think that is the process of the formation of a diasporic identity. And that is, you cannot help it. I would like to hear Dr. Satvinder Benz's view on that.
Yes, Satvinder, as a first generation diasporic living in Canada now with her second generation and third generation children and grandchildren being too young right now to get into a confrontation, I think. Satvinder, please.
Well, yeah, Manpreet, you said it right, that's to be expected. There's traditional values in India between generations that are under attack. So it's not just in the diaspora, but in the diaspora, as Kanwal has attested to, we're more, holding closer to our chests, our traditions, because we're going to lose them. We know they're going to be lost. Language will be lost, tradition will be lost, culture will be lost, religion will be lost. We kind of accept that. Some accept it much more openly, some accept it with reticence, some really hang on. And, we've seen the extreme on the continuum. We have seen families who've been, who've faced suicides of children. We've seen children who've run away from home. We've seen conflict in the home. We've seen challenges between, 4 generations living in one house. So I don't think it's something unique to us. I talk to the Mennonite community, the German community, Dutch community, Chinese community. They all go through these, Japanese Canadian community. We're all struggling with intergenerational differences, and they get exacerbated when you immigrate from a country that is not the dominant culture. So we are constantly finding that good balance between giving our children the foundation of culture, religion, faith, language to jump off of, but because they have to function in a largely dominant Canadian society, they also have to have the tools to be able to function in that society. So again, it's a very complicated question, and you could be sitting on that continuum bar anywhere. You could be, it depends on each family's value systems where they sit, but we have a very complex family structure. You have everything from, what we see in Western society is now reflected in South Asian, so we're over, million strong. So you're going to see everything that you see in Western society starting to be reflected in our society. Between those 4 cohorts of early 1900 settlers to the new immigrants that are coming today, you'll see everything. So yes, the short answer is yes, but the long answer is a very complex answer.
It's very complicated. And in fact, it's not just the diaspora, as you said. We are witnessing the same issues here within India also. particularly now in urban spaces, the same kind of they are interacting with so many different things, people, ideas.
And the other thing that's happened, like I said earlier, was just the age of information. You know, India is at our fingertips now. Canada is at your fingertips. Everybody is seeing, watching, interacting with the same videos and the music and the culture. So the stresses are greater now in terms of infiltration. You know, you don't need colonization. You just can't send over your television shows now. So the traditions are being attacked and addressed all the time. And so it will be, so it is in society. And that's where your word transition is such a key word, because we're transitioning all the time.
Yeah, but I think it is a normal course to be
I agree.
Into new formations. So that is the natural course of things.
And as somebody who has been teaching diasporic Indian literature and cinema in various parts of the world, what I usually find, whether it's in Germany or was in Canada or in England or in France, the students, the diasporic Indian students in those communities don't very often choose to come to our seminars because it is seen as something, you know, ethnic, and it will kind of mark them. At that age, especially, the second and third generations would want to be seen as part of the host society. For them, it's no longer a host society. Yeah. For them, it's the only home they know. Whereas later on, when we have more adult students coming from that group, especially in places like France, for instance, we had some, we are talking about the Pondicherry diaspora there. There, you know, there's a greater desire to know what they had denied when they were in their teens. Now it's a time to catch up, and not just through Bollywood cinema, but to catch up more seriously as to who they are, that part of their identity, which they unfortunately had tried to push away from them. They want it now, and that makes them more kind of rounded, and even if they are married to people from within that host community from the new homeland, have mixed race children or whatever, it is at that time that the desire to inculcate their parents or grandparents' generation information, if not values, into their children and grandchildren. That's interesting. And the kind of multi-generational dynamics that happens in the diasporic society, it's very interesting for me as an outsider to see that happening, and as an outsider to be seen as somebody neutral, and hence to be able to talk to me about it again is without being judged, and I will do it without being judgmental or without being parochial into inverted commas. So it's interesting, the whole issues which are the diverse issues which are opened up with when you try to teach diaspora studies outside, and it's wonderful. So do we have any more comments, points? We have a little time. Please feel free to come in. Anyone at all, you want to unmute yourselves and say something, please do that.
Ma'am, Dr.
Yes.
Amrita Talwar has just put,
yes, Amrita Talwar. Would you like to answer her? Can you see her question?
Ma'am, she has two daughters studying in Barnard right now. And these girls are, this is something which I have observed in a lot of places within, you know, when I was studying the diaspora, that youngsters are connecting back to their cultural roots through educational institutions. You know, the societies, I've seen that in UFB as well, in Dr. Satwinder's center, that, you know, when the cultural connection is provided to the youngsters outside the conservative patriarchal atmosphere of maybe their homes or maybe the gurdwaras sometimes, and when it comes into focus through the educational institutions, they are more amenable to connect to it. So I saw her daughter, Gauri Talwar, is the captain of the Bhangra team in Barna. So I think that is what she's talking about, like, the youngsters getting connected back to their roots, far away from home in the diaspora, because that is a big thing over there, right? And as
Yeah.
it is very true that at a certain age, they want to connect back. My daughter, who is now 25, has suddenly decided that she wants to learn Gurmukhi. And she's never been into it, but suddenly she feels that if she doesn't connect to the literature and the poetry in Punjabi, she's losing out on something. So suddenly, suddenly she's being able to read Punjabi. So this kind of connection is not going to be lost. It is just going to change and transmute a little. I don't think we are going to lose out on all cultural and social connections. They're right there. They're just there in a different form. That's it.
They are kind of latent. And yeah, and
they're just, they're going to do it in their
their
own
own time, in their own time.
not in the way we want them to.
Right. And I would like to, I mean, as far as somebody from India, but not with any connection with the Punjabi culture in a city like Mumbai, the first time I did Bhangra was at Satwinder Bain's inauguration of her Indo-Canadian Centre in 2006 or 7 when I was there as a visiting professor. So it was interesting. And then, of course, the tradition continued at the Taj Mahal Hotel, where they had come with their educational delegation with John Potts and others, and including your then Premier Gordon Campbell was there, and your then president of the UFV, and we were all frantically doing the Bhangra there. The second time I was doing it. So the diaspora continues with certain cultural traditions, which in an urban setting, especially for somebody from outside the community, just wouldn't be available. So is there anyone else who would like to say something, or shall we wind up the session? Anyone else? You can unmute yourselves and speak. Kirti, can they do that?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Maybe a short question or a point anybody would like. There's Stephanie Trassoff. How can I purchase the books? It's online, my Stephanie. I think you can purchase it. It's online, right, Manpreet?
It's on Amazon.
It's on Amazon. Right. Yeah, do that. Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Yeah, thank you for coming online, Stephanie. Are you from the UFV? Stephanie from the UFV? I don't know. Okay, never mind. Shall we then wind up this wonderful, no, she's in the USA. She's from the USA. Shall we wind up this session, wonderful session? And I know Kirti is going to offer a formal vote of thanks, but it was wonderful engaging with all of you this morning for us, evening for you. And we hope we'll be able to continue having more such sessions. We need to keep the mind engaged and keep thinking during the pandemic. Kirti? Kirti, you are muted. Kirti, unmute yourself.
Yeah. Sorry for that. First and foremost, thank you so much, Dr. Kamal Neel, for being here and agreeing to launch Dr. Manpreet Singh's book and giving your insights, not just on the book, but also the Sikh diaspora. Thank you so much. Dr. Bains, it was so good to connect with you after so many years. Thank you for being here today with us and offering your insights in your remarks and taking part in the discussion. Thank you so much. Our co-host, Dr. Labdi, thank you for being there and agreeing to co-host this event with us. Thank you. Dr. Mangai of the University Computer Center, who arranges for the Zoom meetings that we are having this program on, and one of our team members, Rohit, who actually helped set up this meeting for us. Thank you, Rohit, and thank you, Dr. Mangai, for arranging this for us. My dear friend Hridaya, for being the co-host for our programs and giving the back-end support always on all our Zoom meetings. Thank you, Hridaya, for being there. And last but not the least, our participants from India and Canada and the US. Thank you for taking the time out of your day or evening, for attending this program. It means a lot to us. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thank you, Manpreet, for writing this book and for letting us launch it for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr.
And thank you to Mr. Shekhar for publishing the book so that we are able to launch it. Thank you very much to everyone. Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who's made this possible. It really means a lot because, it has also brought together all the people who were part of the course of the making of this book. So it really means a lot to have all of you here. Thank you, Dr. Kanwal Neil, because, he sent me a list of 5 questions prior to this launch happening and made me think all over again about what I had written. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, everyone, and wonderful having had you, and we'll meet again.